From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
A plan to bring your next drink right to your front door. Plus, ignoring the governor's plea for Medicaid expansion as the legislative session moves on without it. But first, what will it take to move the legalization of medical marijuana forward? That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. Well, this is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Thought I'd mix things up a little bit and not start with talk of the Republican tax plan this week. By the way, we are still waiting for the House and Senate to attempt an override of the governor's veto on that. Instead, another big question this year. Will 2024 be the year of marijuana legalization? The Senate's been the holdup, so Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau took the question straight to the Senate president. In a pre-session interview, Senate President Ty Masterson told KSN's Rebecca Chung he didn't see the current medical marijuana legislation going anywhere, saying, quote, "I can tell you the bill that's in our committees right now is a non-starter. Part of that is you've seen the disaster in Oklahoma, right? With cash transactions for land. You're seeing a lot of gang activity," Masterson told her. Masterson also cited how law enforcement is dealing with legalization in other states like Oklahoma, saying one of their drug enforcement people down there and their agency, he said they're 98% overgrown. He said 1.8% of their gross can fill every medical card, so it's not being sold as medicine, right? So I think that harms the conversation. Masterson also spoke about incidents in Wichita where middle school students got sick after eating edibles. He said he's open to conversations, but the bill will need to protect our children. Quote, "What I'm open to is basically some type of pilot program or something that is controlled to the point you can test it. But a horse isn't out of the barn, and you can't ever put it back in." And joining us to tackle this and other topics this week, we've got State Representative John Carmichael, a Wichita Democrat, and State Representative Susan Humphreys, a Wichita Republican, as well as David Seaton, publisher of the Cali Courier-Traveler. Thank you all for being here this week. And the marijuana legalization question has been hanging around for several years. Is there room for advancement? I know Masterson spoke about the pilot program idea, and I know I was speaking with some lobbyists before the session started who said that their customers were also interested in a pilot program idea. So is that the way to go?
I hadn't heard about the pilot program. I didn't know that the Senate president had talked about that. I've heard him talk about the fact that, is it medical marijuana? Are there doses? What's the situation? We know it can't go through pharmacies. What is the regulation? How do you protect kids? How do you protect the workforce? How do you protect our other medical facilities? I mean, there's so many questions with the bill that we have out there right now.
And there were a lot of folks online who are proponents. They support the idea of legalizing at least medical marijuana, if not full legalization, who were poo-pooing some of the issues that he brought up, the protection of kids. But I've actually heard on the scanners these incidents, and we've covered them at Cake News in my other job, where we've got middle schoolers who are going to the hospital because they OD'd basically on CBD gummies.
Yeah.
I
I would think people should do their research themselves and look and see how has it affected other states, what's happened there, and then we see what happens with the kids.
Yeah, when I hear stories like that, it's definitely not good, but I sort of step back and look at the big picture idea and think, well, alcohol is legal, the most abused drug we have in the United States, and I'm sure there are probably more incidents of
add nicotine to the list.
Nicotine too, but alcohol more devastating,
probably.
I think. But
well,
and so middle schoolers probably abuse. So, but as far as this, you asked the question directly: will it be passed or something in 2024? And I think the betting answer is no. It seems like on the healthcare front, it's Medicaid that's taking up all the oxygen, but Medicaid expansion. But it is true in Oklahoma that it does seem to be kind of, he used the word disaster. It's been a mess, I think. I mean, I know when that medical marijuana passed there, overnight dispensaries popped up, and even the little town, we're a border county in Cali County, and even a little town across the border where we have a weekly newspaper, grows and dispensaries popped up, and they shut down just 2 of them, I think in the fall. Grows because they didn't have the proper tagging, and there's some signage issues too, I guess, that they're really cracking down now. But I would think there's got to be how many states have medical marijuana? There's got to be and maybe you know, John, there's got to be a state that's doing it right or coming close to it that Kansas could try to model after. It's got to be out there.
Yeah, I think we're at the point where we're one of only a handful, maybe 4 states, three.
At last count, I think it was 3.
3 states that don't have some form of legal marijuana. The Oklahoma example we should learn from, because that is the clear exemplar of how not to do it. It passed by referendum. Then there were regulations proposed that were so restrictive that the courts held that it didn't express the will of the people in the referendum, and then they came back with regulations that were Wild West. We don't want to do that. But our neighboring states of Missouri and Colorado have regulated marijuana sales, and the fact is a regulated, legal, and taxed marketplace, I think, is far safer for everyone. The dealer sells to kids, he doesn't care. But a licensed marijuana dealer, just like a licensed retail liquor store, is a legitimate business, and as a result, they don't trade in those things. Right now, marijuana is as available and as potent as it's ever been in my life in Kansas, and I first encountered it in 8th grade. So we're not winning the war. What we're doing is we're subsidizing a violent black market that sells to anybody.
Yeah.
And it's really time for us to join the rest of the nation. We've got experiments, if you will, or examples of other states. We know how to do it. The fact of the matter is, if you put it in front of the Kansas legislature and you got the Senate president out of the way on this issue, I'd pass. And if it doesn't pass, it's an issue for voters in November, because we know the vast majority of Kansas voters support not only medical marijuana, but adult use marijuana as well.
If you're talking about the Fort Hays State
the Kansas
survey,
Speaks poll.
and we all know that actually was about taxes. How would you like to raise, if you had to raise taxes, what would be one way? And that was offered as an option. That survey was not a question about marijuana, it was about taxes.
There are a multiplicity of polls, though, that reach the same conclusion.
I would say that, would you think that medical marijuana, I think every time we put a poll up on our website about it gets big support, medical marijuana, and it's not scientific, of course, but I would think that would probably pass easily, vote of the people. But recreational marijuana, I'm doubtful about that.
And how many
probably because
states
of
have
the
kept-
Oklahoma example.
But how many states have kept it a medical and not gone further and then eventually had
They
recreational?
eventually
Yeah.
do, because the
Yeah.
citizens realize that the boogeyman of marijuana is the thing of reefer madness. If you look in my district, we had a referendum, if you will, here in Wichita to impose a $10 fine for possession of marijuana. Now, the Attorney General later ruled it invalid, but my district went about 68% in favor of that, and that was in 2014. And as we've seen more and more states successfully implement legalized, regulated, and taxed marijuana, I think it's clear that we're making a mistake. We're turning this over to the bootlegger, just like we did in Prohibition, and it doesn't work.
Do you think the Democrats would support a pilot program like Masterson was saying, something more controlled and to sort of get your foot in the door?
Let me give you an example. 3 years ago, when we did pass so-called medical marijuana in the House, it was a very restrictive bill. It was only for specific diagnoses. It did not include what people now call flower, but that's really leafy marijuana that you smoke. And we went ahead and supported that because that was the best that we could get or that we could do. Now, Silas Miller has introduced a bill that is different. It is adult use marijuana, just like we have in Colorado, just like we have in Missouri, and I think that's where we need to be. Now, if we have to take a step with medical marijuana so that people in Kansas recognize that it doesn't make you go insane, then that's what we'll have to do to get there. But eventually, of course, we're going to have legalized adult use marijuana. It's just a question of when.
I'm pretty sure there's people in our border county that are going across the state lines to
Oh.
get a
really?
marijuana card. Yeah,
Really?
I'm pretty sure that's already happening.
It's happening
yeah.
along every
Yeah.
state line with a
And
shared.
I just have to add, the black market hasn't stopped in Colorado. We should ask the law enforcement in Colorado what they think it's done to their state. So I think a careful analysis of what's going on in the other states is really important to do instead of just.
Yeah, there's
for-
always
And we're-
diversion. There's always diversion, but for the most part, a legal marketplace is far easier, better to regulate, and safer for the citizenry than an illegal marketplace.
And I think a big barrier is that it's still a Schedule I drug federally.
Oh,
If that
absolutely.
changed and we could have better research, it would make all the difference, I think, for the people like myself who want to see something more controlled.
The Democrats
And I'm
have a
gonna end the
congressional
conversation there,
candidate that's
folks.
running
This
on that
has
very
been-
platform.
This has been probably the most informative and well-informed discussion on medical marijuana or marijuana legalization on the show to date. Thank you all. Now we're going
And
to
there's
move
been
on.
a lot of them.
There have been a lot of them. The fight for Medicaid expansion, something else that's not new, isn't making much progress this year. The governor called on lawmakers to hold a hearing on her Medicaid expansion bill by Kansas Day. That was last Monday. But both of her bills in the House and Senate are still sitting in committee. And Rebecca Chung says it may stay that way for a while.
Yeah, no traction on either of the governor's bills yet. And I did speak with Republican leaders in the House Health Committee. They say it could stay that way for a while. It's another push for Medicaid expansion at the Kansas State House, but Republicans are holding off.
After turnaround.
Republican Representative Brenda Landwehr chairs the House Health Committee. She says the bill won't be taken up until after turnaround day on February 23rd.
We're the legislature and we set the schedule, not the governor.
The jury's out as to whether a fair hearing will actually be conducted.
Minority Leader Vic Miller introduced the governor's bill on the House side. It expands Medicaid to 150,000 Kansans, including work requirements for people with coverage. He says putting off the hearing could make it less likely to pass this year.
Turnaround means that's the last day to take action in the House of Origin. So that in and of itself tells you that doesn't sound like the chairwoman's very serious about moving the bill along.
But as for whether the bill will make it out of committee,
We'll see what happens after the hearing.
right now Kansas is one of 10 states that have not expanded Medicaid. We'll have to see if either of the governor's bills make it to the floor for a vote this year. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
Of course, a bill doesn't necessarily have to make it out of committee for it to end up being debated on the House or Senate floor. There are other maneuvers available. We've seen that happen in the House in previous sessions. Do we see a repeat this year?
I don't think of that. I think if it's anything's gonna happen, and I do think there will be hearings, but I think going around the procedure is not gonna happen. I think there are too many people that are opposed.
Jeff?
Well, as far as going around the procedure, the way it reached the floor several years ago was a bill that had to do with providing mother's milk or breast milk to infants under Medicaid. And they ruled it was germane. And the Republican leadership who wanted to stop it, they made a mistake. I don't think that Dan Hawkins is going to make that mistake. There are other procedural ways, but in the end, it's going to take another election before we see Medicaid expansion in Kansas. And the people who are opposed to Medicaid expansion, they're going to see themselves turned out at the polls, and that's the way it's going to happen. Now, we're going to keep fighting. We're going to try to get Kansas Medicaid expansion, but realistically, you can hear from Representative Landwehr that she doesn't really intend to report out a bill. If she did, she would have already had a hearing, and it'd already be awaiting argument on the House floor.
I think that's one of the things that surprised me over the years is that there does seem to be overwhelming support among the population
Absolutely.
to expand Medicaid. And, but yet the people who are against it do not pay a price at the polls. And so I don't feel like they think that it's going to cost them. And I was a little surprised, and maybe that's because, I was a little surprised when Governor Kelly put out her Medicaid expansion part 2, with the work requirement and some other things and how quickly the Republican leadership, sort of scoffed at it and said, no way, this isn't
Because
as serious.
it should be scoffed at.
Yeah.
1 hour of work was part of the work requirement. It's been shut down. The Biden administration has not waived any work. They haven't allowed any work requirements in Medicaid. That's not going to happen. I think the governor knew it. It sounded good, but that's not going to happen. There's a fundamental misunderstanding of what Medicaid expansion is. It is for able-bodied adults between 19 and 64. It's not for who we think about should have Medicaid. They have it. Pregnant women, people with disabled, all of those over 64, they have it already. This is adding a whole a section of the population that could be working and may be working. And so the whole workforce issue is also another. We're afraid people would leave the workforce because then they could get Medicaid. There's a whole host of problems, and I think it's just a misunderstanding, and that's why I think we don't pay for it at the polls, is because when people understand what Medicaid expansion really is they see that it's not good for the state, it's not good for people. Yes, we need a robust safety net for those who really need it.
Well, but
that's what we need.
I think what some Republicans have failed to understand is that the old understanding of Medicaid is changed. Because of the need for health insurance and the gaps that people fall in, and how much that can devastate lives when you don't have health insurance. You're working, you don't have it. I know an employee that we have that had to declare bankruptcy because of it, and a problem. And I'm not sure if it was related to when he was here or a previous employer, but I think maybe the definition, the expansion, the Republican Party needs to expand their mind of what it's for. And all the benefits you get from it being the federal government paying 90%, isn't that right? I mean, that's a pretty good investment, right? If you're going to invest in stocks,
you take,
I'll get $9, you give me one and all.
Other states are going bankrupt because of their Medicaid expansion, because so many more people have joined than they were expecting.
That's just simply not the case, Susan.
I
and
think
the analysis is in Kansas, if we expanded Medicaid tomorrow, it would have a net benefit to the state general fund because of the jobs that it creates in the medical profession.
And that's
debatable. It's not able-bodied people trying to take a free ride. It's underemployed Kansans who are working 20 or 30-hour jobs or 2 jobs. They don't have employer-provided health care. They don't make enough money to qualify for the Affordable Care Act. They have no insurance. And we've turned away $3 billion of federal money because some of my friends want to continue to tell these stories that it bankrupts states. No state has gone bankrupt because of Medicaid.
Well, it's
All
not,
right, and
it's
we're
not
going to leave it there
bill,
because we've got
but
some other
overall,
bills
it seems
to
like
discuss.
It's not good.
We're having some great discussions. I'm loving them. And there's one more at least I want to get in there. It could be a chance to have your next margarita from your favorite restaurant delivered to your door. Some retailers in Kansas are trying to make it possible with a change to state law. From Walmart to DoorDash and Amazon, the story was all about how Kansans want to be able to order anything from a 6-pack to their favorite mixed drink online and have it delivered to their door.
If you're too busy or sometimes like me, just plain lazy, and you'd rather have your groceries, your food, or a 6-pack of beer delivered to your house, we consider our Dashers to be the last link from that retail counter to your home.
Companies like DoorDash argue their methods are proven safe. After all, 44 other states have already legalized these third-party deliveries.
We hope after this sees some success that we'll be able to present our customers with everything they would like to offer, and they can currently order both curbside and in our stores.
And in the process, put more money in the pockets of everyone involved. DoorDash alone quotes a 30% increase in pay for its drivers, a 50% increase in business for restaurants, and
The average independent liquor store on our platform last year saw sales increase by over 180% in the 6th month compared to the 1st. And total liquor sales on DoorDash in the U.S. have grown 295% over the past year.
But opponents say the legal safety net in this proposal has a lot of holes in it, from personal and business data protection.
You enter into a contract with one of these delivery services. They know what you're selling. They know who your customers are. They know what their proclivities are, how much they spend, and so forth. They can target market them. They can move people from one retailer to another, and you not even know what has happened to your customer.
To customer safety, such as making sure the customer is of legal age and not drunk at the time of the purchase. The only liquor store owners to testify were both against the idea.
It's always people from out of state who want to come into our state and tell us how we need to change our liquor laws and how we do business. Obviously not a huge fan of that.
We are very, very regulated, and I don't see how this would be regulated as well as the liquor stores are.
And before we started recording this episode, we were talking about this story a little bit. And John, you were saying that a good part of this is a case of big business versus little locally owned stores.
What this is, by the way, the gentleman from DoorDash would hardly be an unbiased source for that information.
Which is why I sourced it as saying he said.
I appreciate, and I appreciate that. Liquor dealers, the people in the business, will tell you that it doesn't have that type of impact at all. And the bottom line, though, is what a lot of people want to see here is an end to local businesses, local retail liquor stores. They want to see mega centers or Walmart or Sam's Club and nobody else in the liquor business. And that's what the small liquor store owners are saying. But we really need to be concerned about diversion of alcohol. We talked about marijuana just a moment ago. Right now, in an unregulated market, you can get marijuana delivered to your home by your dealer. But we don't want to be doing that either with marijuana or with alcohol. It's dangerous. These products need to be regulated, and so this is a bad idea.
And yet we are living in a society. I was talking about how every time I do one of these stories, I did a story the last time there was a hearing on this too. And viewers are like, yes, we want that. Why? I can't believe we don't have that yet in Kansas.
And I'm happy to say John and I are in agreement on this. But the question I have to ask is really, is more alcohol sales touting that, oh, it's going to grow and grow? Is that a positive thing? I'm having trouble seeing that.
You know, it's just like marijuana sales. I'm not here to say that everybody ought to smoke weed every day. Same thing with alcohol. I mean, these things need to be regulated, they need to be controlled, they need to be managed responsibly by adults. And doing things like what my friend Scott Schneider was proposing there is not safe for kids. It's also not safe for people with an addiction problem.
I don't have a big opinion on this personally. It does seem like this is kind of the way society is moving, you know, with people bringing stuff to us and the convenience of it, especially as an outgrowth of the pandemic. But I'm sympathetic with the small liquor store. There's some of them are better advertisers, frankly. We're not getting it from Walmart and Sam's Club. But so it would be kind of sad to see them undercut like that. And I'm wondering maybe if they could, if it were passed, if they could somehow get into the delivery business that might help them.
You know, interestingly enough, I think they could, but I think the majority of them are of the mind that that really doesn't improve their bottom line. It increases their employee payroll expense. It increases their costs for delivery vans,
they don't have the scale
insurance.
That the big companies have.
These are mom and pop shops.
And DoorDash presumably is going to bring you your hamburger along with your margarita that they picked up at the drive-up window 3 blocks down the street and then charge you $20 to bring it to you.
Well, I can say right here that I am a proud non-ever user of DoorDash or any of those food delivery systems.
You and I both.
Same here.
I have never used them. I do appreciate Amazon.
But my son,
this may be the table of the dinosaurs, guys.
My son likes it. He's 18 and he thinks it's cool, and I guess he's willing to pay the 20% surcharge or whatever.
I certainly enjoy alcohol.
The younger kids are.
I make no bones about that, but I don't go through the drive-up window at the hamburger stand to grab myself a margarita on the way to work.
Right.
All right. Well, I've got one more story for you guys. Let's see what you think about this one. Should dads pay child support from the moment of conception? That's the idea behind a new proposal at the Kansas State House this week. Representative Leah Howell of Wichita this week introduced a bill that would require child support to cover medical and pregnancy-related expenses dating back to the moment of conception. It would become a 10th criteria for Kansas judges to consider when determining child support. It would not cover elective abortions except to prevent the death of the mother. According to the Peterson Kaiser Family Foundation, it costs almost $19,000 to have a baby from prenatal through delivery and postpartum care. And that's presuming you have health insurance.
You know, it's easier and easier to determine the paternity even while pregnant. And so I think it's just only makes sense for child support to start earlier because the expenses definitely start before birth.
The proposal defines an unborn child as, quote, a living organism of the species Homo sapiens in utero at any stage of gestation from fertilization to birth. Howell says she brought the idea forward on behalf of Kansas Family Voice, a Christian group that says it believes God's design for the family is the strongest foundation for a free society. I mean, pregnancy is expensive.
Absolutely.
No doubt about that. Paying for proper treatment becomes more difficult all the time.
Yep.
But it could also make a big difference in outcomes for both mom and baby.
Absolutely, and there are 3 people involved. It's not just the mom and the baby. There's always a father involved, and having him help, why not? That's part of it.
You know, I've read the bill. We haven't had hearings yet. I assume it's probably going to come to judiciary where you and I serve. I don't know.
It got introduced in Fed and State, so I'm not sure
where
it's
it
going to
ends
go.
up. But at any rate, it's a good idea. I may not agree with all the underpinnings of what's been said here. There's a pro-choice, pro-life debate, but the bottom line is dads ought to pay. They ought to do their share, and if they do, it's good for the state, because we go back to Medicaid. What happens now is Medicaid programs pay for a lot of these deliveries, and just like we chase down dads to pay child support for living children when the state has to come in and support those kids, we ought to be doing the same thing before birth. It makes really good sense to me.
Well, more bipartisan agreement.
I'm thrilled to hear you say that.
In researching this, I did see that there's federal legislation along these lines too, I think. And the concern there is among abortion rights advocates is that I think they use the word in the legislation personhood, which they're worried that that's an attempt to get a foot in the door to create rights for a fetus.
The same type of a clause is in this bill.
But it doesn't use the word personhood.
No, but it defines when life begins at conception or fertilization.
Right,
but don't let the names and the abortion debate get in the way of a good idea. I think this is something we ought to do.
Yeah. So I'm just curious if the abortion rights people will object on those terms to something like this. It'd be interesting to see.
I'm an abortion rights person. Here he sits, and I'm telling you, this is important enough, as far as I'm concerned, that I can probably live. This language is not new or unique to this bill. It's already in other types of Kansas law, and if we can take care of kids and their moms, then that's what we ought to be doing.
It's a woman's kind of rights issue too, right? Because they
Yes.
get abandoned by this.
And men stepping up
in that
to
sense,
do what they should be doing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for us today. We had some great discussions. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks as well to you for joining us. We'd also like to thank our news partners, the Wichita Eagle, Cake News, and KSN News, for sharing their materials with us. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion. Would love to keep the conversation going. Just look for us on social media, PBS Kansas or Pilar Pedraza TV on most platforms. For now, stay safe and have a great week.